Hello, we want to look at socialization as an important function of the family. In the discussion of the family and its functions, we noted that socialization is one of the primary functions, and the family is also the primary agent of socialization. This means, therefore, socialization is very critical for the development of members of the family. So the discussion that we want to have want to focus on three main areas. One, the meaning of socialization. Two, the characteristics of socialization. And three, the types of socialization. So these are the areas that we want to focus on. In our second part of socialization, we shall broadly focus on two areas. One, the elements of socialization, and then the methods of socialization. So I want to invite you all to this very, very significant discussion. Socialization can be understood as a process whereby standards, skills, motives, and attitudes of individuals are developed so that they fit into what society generally considers as appropriate or desirable. We also need to understand this in the context of the fact that at some point in the future of an individual, there are certain responsibilities that an individual would be required to carry out when they become adults. So, the entire preparation that we receive at childhood are basically designed to prepare us to discharge our future roles as adults effectively. But we can also understand socialization as a process through which individuals become members of society, and this includes the process of acquiring knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, the beliefs, the values, and behaviors that they consider as being necessary in enabling them to function well in society. Lastly, we can understand socialization as a process through which people are taught to be proficient members of any given society, and also it describes the ways that people come to understand societal norms as well as expectations. In other words, when you talk about socialization, is a total teaching and processes that we are taken through as individuals in a society's effort to make us proper and functioning members of society. So it's about upbringing and how well we exposed to certain tasks, certain skills, and how we develop behaviors or acquire behaviors and attitudes that prepare us to function according to what society considers appropriate. So it's about enabling us to fit in society and to discharge our roles as will be required when we become adults from time to time. I want us now to look at some of the characteristics of socialization. In other words, regardless of the society, regardless of the geographical setting, as well as the place where socialization takes place, we are saying that there are certain fundamental principles that underpin a given process that we call socialization. And these are what we call the characteristics of socialization. One of the characteristics of socialization is that it is designed to control human behavior. We know that an individual, right from birth to death, undergo training, and our behavior is also controlled in numerous ways, in many ways rather. And socialization helps in controlling human conduct by instilling values that enable people to behave in ways that society considers as appropriate or as in order. And to take care of the social order, there are certain values and norms that society imposes on individuals. In other words, there are certain set standards that individuals are required to conform to. Once these standards are developed, then individuals are trained in a manner that enable them to fit and function within those particular standards and norms. These standards and norms, they may be those that form part of societal culture and traditions, while others could be those that are developed by modern institutions. For instance, in our places of work, we have the human resource policies that guide the conduct of workers. And at all times, we are required to behave according to the dictates of those policies. So that desire for organization to ensure that we fit within the policies is an effort by that organization to control human behavior. Otherwise, if left on our own, we can be anything and everything. And at the end of the day, we might become indisciplined, immoral, and ineffective in what is required of us as individuals. So socialization insists in ensuring that appropriate skills and values and norms are instilled in individuals so that those individuals function within the bounds and parameters that every society has set up. So one of the major characteristics of socialization is that it controls human behavior. We are not meant to behave the way we want to know. Our behavior can be detrimental not only to others, but also to ourselves in one way or the other if we are left to behave as we wish. That's why controls have to be put in place. And this one is done through structures, the society that families have developed to ensure that we behave within the bounds of those particular rules and regulations. Uh, the other characteristic of socialization is that it can be informal as well as formal. Informal socialization is one that occurs at the family level. This is when we're young, when we're children, such as learning languages, understanding customs of our communities, norms, as well as values. So anything that takes place at the family level that seeks to ensure that we understand the language. And language here is not just communicating, it's about whom do you communicate to, how do you communicate, and what time do you communicate what. That becomes part of informal socialization. For instance, there's a way a child is expected to speak to a fellow child. So there are also ways a child is expected to speak to adults. There are also ways in which certain topics may not be allowed to be discussed between children and adults. So all this is part of language. It is part of customs, part of norms, and it's part of values that underpin our society. So informal socialization is one that occur at the family or one that occur in small groups like peer groups, or sometimes when we get used so much as students, sometimes we become informal. We discuss things without prior planning and without caution. It is because the level of relationship is quite intimate, and therefore people feel at ease in terms of discussing anything that they find appropriate at that level, and that is informal socialization. Then we have what we call formal socialization. This one now takes place through direct instruction and education in schools, in colleges, and even places of work. When we're being asked to follow school rules, when we're being asked to dress in a particular way in school, say in uniform, to be in uniform, in colleges, to observe certain standards of class attendance, certain standards of taking exams, certain standards of dressing, same thing in our place of work, how we relate with our seniors, how we relate with our contemporaries at place of work, and how we relate with our juniors. That is part of formal socialization. But we need to notice that whether socialization is informal or formal, it takes place rapidly if the agents are unanimous in their ideas and skills. In other words, if there's no differences, if there's no disagreement in terms of the direction socialization takes place, then at that stage, socialization can be quite effective. For instance, if, say, both parents, a father and a mother, agree on the kind of values they want instill in children, and they both agree that this is the direction that we need to take as a family, then imparting such skills become easier, and children are likely to internalize them quite faster and practice them. But if there's divergence of opinion regarding which direction, which values to impart in children, for instance, a father thinks of a different way and the mother thinks of a different way, divergence and conflict in terms of what's appropriate for the child can actually slow down the process of socialization because it can bring confusion in terms of uh, making it difficult for the child which of the two values between the one being projected by the father and the one being advocated by the mother is appropriate. So, lack of unanimity or lack of a common understanding in terms of which direction a particular socialization process needs to take place can actually make it quite difficult for a child to learn, and it can make socialization process a little bit tedious, complex, and even sometimes quite difficult to achieve. The other thing that is common with all socialization processes, regardless of the family setting, the family type, and the place in which it takes place, is that socialization is a continuous process. It doesn't end. We go through socialization from the time we are born until we die. It is a lifelong activity and process that seeks to teach us. And that is why there is a common say in some people that education is a continuous thing. We learn things when we were children, we learn things when we become adults, and we learn things even when we become elderly. Nobody is too big to learn. Nobody is too knowledgeable to learn. Nobody knows everything. You may know everything today, but somebody else might know something that you may not know. And therefore, that exchange of ideas, of information becomes quite important. And therefore, socialization, it is continuous. That is, society perpetuates itself through socialization process, through culture, and it is passed from one generation to the next generation, and through that there is the issue of learning. Adults, the elderly, will teach those that are immediately below them. And those immediately below them again does the same until it reaches the youngest in any society. The youngest today might be adults tomorrow and might be elderly in future. So they have to be taught the right way so that when it's appropriate for them, they can also pass over the knowledge that they have about society, they have about values, and they have about beliefs to the generation that will be below them at the time when they are adults and when they are elderly. That is why socialization is a continuous process. It does not stop. It only stops when one dies. Because from time to time, there are new things that we need to learn. Even what we know might not be appropriate to be applied in a given setting. So again, at that time, we also learn. So it is a continuous process. The other characteristic of socialization is that it is culture specific. That is, socialization differ from one society to another. Certain values, certain expectations, certain belief systems, they are not universal across all cultures. Every culture has certain value that are specific to it. It has certain norms that are specific to it. It has certain belief systems that are specific to it. And therefore, what a person becomes is a product of the cultural orientation of the society in which the person is brought up and in which the person is exposed to in terms of enculturation. And this is due to the fact that every society has its own norms, it has its own values, and therefore expectations concerning what people should become. What's expected of a person in a given culture might not be the same of what an equivalent person is expected of in another culture. For instance, the roles of women are not across in all cultures. In some cultures, women have particular roles. The roles that a given culture permits them to do might be prohibited to women in another culture. So, socialization is culture context, it is culture based. And that is why a person is brought up based on a given culture. Uh, it also suggests that children or individuals are socialized to become the ones with their social values. It is culture specific. If I'm from the Luo society, then there are certain values that are imparted in me, which might not be the same as the values that a child brought up, say, in a Kalenjin family is. This is because the cultural expectations and beliefs of my community are not the same as of another community. So I'm brought up to observe standards, to observe beliefs, to observe norms, and to develop attitudes that are expected of members of my community or society. The same environment would also be exposed to a person in a different community. So culture is specific. There is no individual that is all-rounded. I know some might argue, what about a person who can speak several languages? Yes, you may speak several languages, but again, in what context? Perhaps you learned the language as a means of trade, or because your friends are from that language, are from a given community, and therefore through that interaction you learned it. But language is just a small component of culture. Knowing language of a given community does not translate to being a person of that community. It simply makes you fairly familiar and fairly more acceptable to that community or to that society, but it does not make you that society. If today I can speak fluent Gikuyu language, it does not make me a Kikuyu. It only makes me acceptable to members of the Kikuyu community when I speak that language. They embrace me faster than another person who may not speak or who is not familiar with that language, but it does not change me from being a Luo to a Kikuyu. The other type of socialization is called second socialization. And second socialization is one in which we learn what is appropriate behavior as a member of a smaller group within the larger family. For instance, the rules and regulations that we are required to observe, say in school, in places of work, in groups that we form, the behavior standards that is required of us so that we can fit and function properly within those settings are what we call secondary socialization. Normally, secondary socialization takes place outside the home, and it occurs maybe between the individual and friends, or between the individual and peers, between the individual and teachers, between the individual and workmates, and even between the individual and classmates or coursemates. So that interaction, that teaching that occur outside the family setting so that we are able to fit in those groups, that is what we call second socialization. It is through second socialization that people learn how to behave in different situations, and also people come to see themselves as members of specific groups. For example, a newly admitted college student must learn the new social and academic environment, such as where lecture halls are, the lecture schedules, the teachers or the lecturers teaching them, and also the kind of behaviors that is expected of him or her as a student. If assignment is set or given out, what is the standard level of work that is required of such a student? All that constitute what we call secondary socialization. When we join our place of work, we also learn rules relating to dressing, uh, other rules relating to what time we report to work, what time we leave work, the process that we need to follow when we are seeking leave of absence from work, and also procedures of addressing our grievances or presenting our grievances to the authorities. All this is expected of us, and we learn and we are taught until we internalize it. That is what we call second socialization. So any form of socialization that takes place outside the family setting, it constitutes what we call secondary socialization. Now, there's another type of socialization that we call developmental socialization. And developmental socialization is simply a learning process where the focus is on development of social skills or on learning behaviors within a given social institution. For example, somebody who is shy may go through developmental socialization in order to learn how to be more outgoing. For example, students sometimes join colleges without prior experience on how to present in groups, how to address gatherings, how to address fellow students, and how to present academic work in class. Or sometimes they may have the knowledge, but they do not know how to constructively write an assignment and present it in a manner that is expected of them at that given level. So that sometimes a student writes assignment, but when it's templated, it sounds more as that one of a high school student. So that student has to undergo developmental socialization to enable the person raise the standard and meet the standard that's required of him or her at the college level. So when individuals are exposed to a situation in which they have to learn new skills to fit in a given social setting, and to meet the standards that are required of that setting, that process is what we call what? Developmental socialization. It is designed to improve our social skills, to enable us to learn new behaviors and to do other things. For example, a person may have been used to dressing casually, and when you join a given organization, you then notice that the dressing code is official. So you have to undergo socialization in order to learn the new dressing code to enable you fit within the value expectations or role expectations of that new social setting. So a lot of times we undergo developmental socialization. Or for example, a newly married person, people who are married might need to undergo developmental socialization to enable them handle their new roles. You cannot continue to behave as a man or as a woman the way you used to behave when you are single. This is because the responsibilities of marriage and family are different, and therefore you must categorically change accordingly in order to meet the new expectations. The way you dress, when you used to dress as a young girl or as an outgoing unmarried woman, you might now need to dress because as a married woman, there are dressing codes that are now expected of you. If you're a man and used to go out often and come back late past midnight nearly every weekend, now because you're married, you must undergo developmental socialization to enable you appreciate your new roles and to enable you fit. Otherwise, if you continue with your lifestyle, with your behaviors, and with the attitude the way it was before marriage, then that has a potential of rocking the marriage and making the marriage collapse. So developmental socialization is normally meant to enable us acquire new social skills so that we can fit within a given social institution. Then we have another type of socialization which we call anticipatory socialization. And this type of socialization refers to the processes of socialization in which a person rehearses for future positions, occupations, and even social relationships. And this type of socialization often happens before a person enters into a new social institution, such as starting a new job, joining a school, getting married, or traveling to a foreign land. Sometimes these are new environments, and sometimes it is expected of us to undertake some form of preparation so that by the time we join these places, we find ourselves fairly comfortable and being able to adapt. If, say, an individual is traveling to a foreign land where the language of communication is different from the one that he was used to, that individual might learn the language of that country or the language of that society for purposes of being able to communicate with them, because communication language is quite critical in individual adaptation to a new environment. Sometimes the individual might need to learn the type of foods that are available in that society, because you can go to an environment in which the type of food that you eat or that are available is quite different from the one that you're used to. So you need to learn about that. You might also need to learn personal etiquette. How do men and women relate? How do they dress? So that you are in a position well prepared to fairly adapt and interact with the people that you're going to get or to interact with or to meet from time to time. So when you talk about this type of socialization, the main purpose is to prepare us for our new role. If, for instance, somebody is newly appointed in a given responsibility, you have just graduated and you have been appointed in a given position in an organization, you might also want, as part of anticipatory socialization, to look at your wardrobe. What kind of clothes do you have? And are they the ones that if you put on when you're going to work in a given organization, will you fit? Or do you need to change your wardrobe? So dressing becomes important. Hairstyle. In some cases, individuals are even forced to change their hairstyle if they feel that the kind of hairstyle they have had for a while or they're synonymous with might not be the one that is expected of them in their new work environment. So all these things they change as part of preparation to our new roles. So anticipatory socialization is what we go through in order to prepare us for our future role. And the future role does not necessarily mean what is going to take place 2 or 3 years. It can even be what will take place tomorrow. So future here simply means the moment after today or the moment after now. So you have to prepare and see to it that you are well accustomed to what is expected of you, and therefore you are ready to handle the challenges that come with that new role. Then we have what we call differential socialization. And this is a process by which people of different groups are socialized differently due to their class, race, or gender. For example, girls are often socialized to be more passive and nurturing, while boys are socialized to be more active and aggressive. It is because the challenges that we face as girls and boys might not be the same, and therefore sometimes we are socialized differently based on the challenges and responsibilities and role expectations that await us. And this can also lead to different expectation experiences for girls and boys as they grow up. And this socialization occurs through a variety of agents, such as parents, teachers, the media, and even peers. For instance, in college, doctors, medical colleges, doctors put on uniform even when they're being trained. In other words, while other students, it's not a requirement that they must be in uniform. It might be a requirement for students who are taking medicine and medical profession to be in uniform. Those who are pursuing education and would wish to become teachers, sometimes they are socialized to adopt a given type of dressing because of the fact that there's a dressing code for teachers. And the regulatory authority for teachers demand that they dress in a manner that does not raise curiosity among the learners. So all those are role expectations. And sometimes we are socialized based on what's expected of us or based on what we want to become. So any socialization process that prepares an individual based on their class, their gender, or race, that type of socialization, we call it differentiation socialization. The last type of socialization that I want us to look at is called re-socialization. And this refers to the process of discarding former behavior patterns and reflexes, accepting new ones as part of a transition in one's life. Socialization means learning new values and doing things completely different. For instance, if you are a president and say you served for 10 years, sometimes you need to undergo re-socialization so that you learn on how to become an ordinary citizen. That is, roles have changed. If you are working and you are now coming to the end of your career, you are retiring, you might need again to re-socialize to learn on how to live outside work. Otherwise, if you retire and you're not properly prepared for the same, then leading retirement life can sometimes be quite difficult. You need to remind yourself that the company of friends that you had, you may now not have them. So when you talk about a socialization, simply means retraining a person who is leaving one status for another, especially to a life that the person was before, so that the person is able to cope. Otherwise, if that's not done, then it can be a huge challenge for the individual. So when you talk about resocialization, we simply mean ensuring that the individual is trained and cultured to fit into a new environment where prestige and status might not be the same as the one that he or she currently has. A president is leaving office after 10 years. A CEO is leaving office after given years. And now after that, will just be an ordinary employee. That person needs to be resocialized to enable him now fit and acquire the lifestyle and expectations of an ordinary person. Otherwise, if that is not done, then there's a potential of role conflict, and it can cause a lot of mental stress, leading to the development of certain health problems. That's why it is important that individuals are fully made aware that they need to know what's expected of them after they leave a particular role. We have come to the end of the discussion, and like I said, our next discussion will focus on the elements and methods of socialization. Thank you so much for your time.